Today's video is about balance. I've been using the 6D Mark II for about 3 years now, using it constantly to shoot both photos and videos. I remember hearing the reviews when it first came out, that people couldn't believe that there was no 4K video in there. And then some people were saying, yeah, but it's a perfectly good photo camera. And that conflict between the two things was something that made me question whether it was the right camera for me. But at the time, it was the best camera to fit my budget. Shooting inside the Canon lineup, because I already had lenses, it was the one that made the most sense to me. I knew that the flip screen was something that I wanted. I knew that the full frame was something that I wanted. And what other camera did they have at the time with a flip screen and a full frame? 3 years ago, there really wasn't another option to get a Canon camera with those features. I sacrificed things like the 4K or the no log footage to get those features, the flip screen specifically for shooting videos, and to save money versus getting a 5D Mark IV at the time, which yes, shot 4K, but didn't have that flip screen to give me the functionality that I needed. But the whole time I've been shooting with this camera, when it's not in my hands, when I'm not taking pictures or shooting videos, I'm constantly thinking, should I be trading this in and using the money to get something else? Should I be upgrading this camera? I'm always looking for what's the next one that I'm gonna get when I finally outgrow this, or when I find a reason that I actually need 4K. Which camera am I gonna get? I honestly can't tell you now because I've spent the last 3 years looking. But the thing is that every time I use it, I'm just struck with how easy it is. It blindsides me how simple it is. Every time I shoot at work with an A7S II or an A7S III, I'm just so frustrated with Sony because it's so hard to get the cameras to do exactly what you want. Yeah, you get all the extra features, but the Canon makes it so much easier to get good images that you have to do so much less to make them look exactly how they were in your head when you were shooting them. And shooting with a Sony is like having all the tools in the world, but they're all built for someone who's left-handed when you're right-handed. You can do the work, but it's just not as comfortable. It's not as natural for you to get exactly what you want out of it. So today I kind of want to ask that question again of myself and of you guys. Am I looking at this wrong? Is this something that maybe I'm just not comfortable with the Sonys because I haven't used them enough? Because I've been using Canon for years and years? Am I missing out? Am I looking at this the wrong way? So I kind of wanted to go over a feature list of some of the things that if I was to get the next camera, if I was to trade this one up to the next one, what kind of things would I actually want? What's important to me for that next camera? I think the biggest thing that the 6D Mark II is lacking is that 4K video. So what's really important for me when it comes to the next camera is having 4K / also having enough megapixels that I can shoot the photos that I need for client work. For my own stuff, for YouTube, for social media and stuff, yeah, shooting something like a 12 megapixel A7S III would be perfectly fine. But some of the things that I actually do for work get printed out on high quality posters and big billboards even. So I'm gonna need something that gets at least 20 megapixels just for those few times that I actually do need them. Another reason that I'm thinking shooting 4K video is gonna be important is not necessarily for the higher resolution or even the cropping in, but one thing that I've noticed is I want to be able to stabilize my footage in post. And when you're shooting 1080 and you stabilize and it crops in a little bit more, well, I'm losing pixels. If I was shooting 4K, it's not so much about being to crop in. Yes, that would be a nice benefit, but using those extra pixels, shooting a little bit wider, knowing that I can use that to stabilize in post would actually be a huge help. Having those extra pixels would actually help stabilize that footage if I'm not using some sort of rig for video too. That's why the next camera, I'm looking at a 4K upgrade. One of the brands that's really tempting to me right now is Fujifilm. I know a lot of people swear by their colors, and a lot of the times they're using those Eterna profiles to get exactly the colors that they want straight out of camera. Now, I like that, and I love the way that some of those pictures look, But what's really important to me is being able to use the dynamic range that comes with shooting raw pictures. So Fujifilm shoots in APS-C and they shoot in JPEG a lot to get the natural Fuji kind of feel, that vibe that they've got. Well, I think I'm more tending to lean towards shooting in RAW no matter what camera system I go with, and using post-processing to get that, including potentially processing them into the Eterna profile, but starting with something with more dynamic range and more ability to push and pull after I've done shooting the photos. I want to have more control. And on the video side, I'd love to be able to have either raw video or log video. Doesn't really matter to me which one I would get. Right now I've been shooting just 8-bit 420 for everything, and it works. I'm able to do what I want with the video, but sometimes I can tell that I'm just missing out on the extra little bump in colors or the dynamic range that having a log would actually get me. So my next camera, that's going to be something that I'm really looking for, is an easy to process raw photos and either a raw or log for video that's going to be easy to work with, and it's going to really just give me the colors that I want without spending weeks trying to color grade everything. I know over the last couple months working in my current job, I've had the issue where I'm trying to shoot a person standing in a doorway greeting another person. And most of the time when I'm shooting from inside of the house, shooting towards the outside, man, the trees and the grass and stuff in the background is completely blown out to try to keep that person, the skin tones, bright enough that I can use that after the fact. I would really love to have more dynamic range than the 60 has. Yes, I found ways to work around it, and most of the time that is basically just blow out the background and save the person. I can underexpose them a little bit and raise it up in Lightroom for photo side, but it's just a huge thing I struggle with constantly. I'm really looking for more dynamic range than this camera is going to give me. Another reason why I tend to look away from the Fujifilm, because they shoot APS-C mostly or medium format, which is just way more than I need. And APS-C tends to have less dynamic range than a full frame camera. So full frame sensor is something that's, I would say, important on my list. For shooting video, yeah, I could probably get away with it, but full frame gives you a couple benefits like low light, there's more light coming into the sensor so that you can actually get better dynamic range because of that. It also gives you the ability to shoot as a shallower depth of field. Not the biggest deal for me. A lot of the video that I shoot, I actually want a little bit more in focus at a time. So I'm perfectly fine shooting like f4 like I am on this lens now, more so than shooting at 1.4, I like that, but I just don't do it as often. The next item on the list is autofocus. And honestly, I know some people can actually shoot manual focus for photos, but me, at the pace that I'm working, at the experience level that I am, I just don't trust myself to do it. I can shoot video with autofocus because I have the ability to kind of move in and out and everyone accepts that. But when it comes to photos, I need good, fast, reliable autofocus. So I can shoot 6.5 frames per second right now with full autofocus the entire time. Yeah, I'm gonna probably miss a couple shots out of every burst that I run through, but that's what I do, is I just shoot more pictures and choose from the ones that end up in focus. I really want the next camera that I look at to be able to give me better autofocus so that I'm missing fewer shots out of my little bursts where someone's smiling at exactly the right time. I really just wanna have more keepers in my collection. When it comes to video, the autofocus is less important for the client shoots that I do, because for those I want the reliability of shooting manual focus and knowing what I'm focused on, rather than shooting autofocus and every once in a while it'll just hunt and lose the person completely. There's been 1 or 2 weddings I've shot this camera. Bride starts walking down the aisle and all of a sudden the camera thinks, oh, you want to look at the wall behind her? Come on, like I have to force it to jump back to her, and I lost that couple seconds that I can never reshoot. So for client work, I usually just stick to straight manual and pull it myself unless I know that they're not moving a lot and the camera's not gonna be hunting completely. But for something like this, I would definitely love to have the autofocus, because this way I can just set it up and I don't have to worry about it. I have a monitor up above. I can look up, see that the box is on my face, and at this distance with this camera and the lighting, I just know that it's not really gonna lose me. Every once in a while you might see a pulse to the background and then remember what it's trying to do and jump back to me. But it's not gonna be something where I'm actually gonna miss shots like this. So yes, I could just set the focus at this distance and give myself a little leeway with a deeper depth of field, but I really do enjoy having the autofocus for something like this when it comes to video. So I would say it's important for both photo and video, but especially more so on the photo side. When it comes to quality of life type features, a flip screen is pretty high up on the list for me. I know you constantly hear people say that flip screens are just for vloggers so that they can see themselves, and it's for just people who are used to shooting with smartphones. But honestly, there's been many times that I stick the camera straight on the ground to get a shot looking up, or have to hold it above my head shooting down at something to get the shot. Well, in that case, yes, I could try to guess, but I'd rather have the ability to just look at a screen and know what I was getting in the frame. That flip screen makes a huge difference when it comes to just the functionality of the camera. Now, the last thing that I kind of wanted to bring up is something that's really important to me, is how many frames per second can the camera shoot. Right now on the photo side, I'm shooting 6.5 frames per second on the 6D Mark II. I have found a couple times over the last couple of years, that I've really wished it shot maybe 10 frames a second. I was just missing the in-between moments of things. Like when a bride and groom are feeding each other cake and they're stuffing in their faces, I'll get the moment where the hand is here, and then I'll get the moment where the cake's already in the face, and I'm not getting the perfect moment, the exact instant that I want. I know that with practice, I'd get better and better at that, but having more frames per second kind of gives me the ability to get multiple shots that I'm not getting now. But I haven't found it to be something where I completely miss what I'm shooting. It's not that I don't get a shot, it's that I don't get the shot the exact second that I want it to be at. When it comes to video, right now on the 6D Mark II, I've only got 60 frames a second in 1080p, so I can shoot slow-mo, and it turns out pretty well. I can use it at 80%, which gives me, slightly incorrect motion blur, but I can still use it as a very slight slow motion, or drop it down to 40% and get true slow motion. I know that having the 120 frames a second would definitely make a difference, but I don't know if it would be an improvement, or if even that it would change the way that I shoot so much, as it would give me more options when it came to working in post, being able to slow it down to multiple different rates and get different types and feels of footage out of the same clip that I would shoot. Now, when you look at this list, I'm sure you look at some of these things as if you have to have them. They're definite must-haves, and maybe one or two are kind of like, it doesn't quite matter as much as the others. They all represent some form of quality increase, whether it's ease of use or a better overall product in the end. But what I've learned when it comes to camera gear is every one of the features that you add also comes at some form of cost. So now I kind of wanted to look at these two lists compared to each other and see, what do you actually lose by gaining a feature? What does that cost you when it comes to function? So the first thing on the list is 4K video / maybe higher megapixel photos, right? And I know it's pretty obvious what the first thing is going to cost you is. It's more storage space. It's more SD cards or CFast cards in camera, also more hard drives when it comes to the computer space. But then also it's going to cost you a faster computer. My 2015 MacBook Pro is probably not going to be able to chew through 4K footage the way that it does 1080. So by jumping up in an increase of features, I'm actually costing myself more than just a new camera and more than just storage for that camera. I'm also having to buy a whole new computer, or spending hours and hours rendering out some form of proxies and then having to fit that into my workflow, which is just kind of more of a hassle and a headache than I think it's worth for me right now to make that jump. But any of you who already did that, if you've jumped from 1080 to 4K, let me know. Do you think I'm being crazy? Am I over exaggerating this? Is there a possibility that, I might be misconstruing that difference between the two? Or maybe if I get a 4K camera, I could still shoot 1080 and be just fine. I just want to hear your guys' opinion on that one to see how, I want to calibrate how I feel versus somebody who already has experience with this. The second thing on the feature list kind of comes with a similar type cost to the 4K footage, and that is the cost of time. If I was shooting log or raw video, that's going to take me overall more time to process, because I'll most likely go from something like raw to a Rec 709, and then from Rec 709 I would color grade the way that I want, and that's an extra step that I'm not having to do now, where I basically just kind of throw a LUT on, make some basic corrections, and I move on. That extra time that is going to cost me is something that I'm going to have to factor into the next jump of both what I charge clients for my work time and what I set aside for myself to get the work done. I already process raw photos, so that's not a huge deal, but it definitely does cost me more time than just shooting JPEGs that look good enough and turning around and handing those to the client. I already factored that time in, but just something to be aware of for yourself is that shooting raw, both videos and photos, that's gonna cost you time overall for that feature. Now, this next one may or may not be an issue depending on your choices after the fact. And that is going to be if you were getting a full frame camera, that does limit you when it comes to some of the lenses that you can choose for it. For example, and this is my favorite example because it's something that's affecting me right now. One of my favorite dream lenses to kind of go on B&H and stare at sometimes is the Sigma 18-35. I know it's super sharp, I know it gets some good images, great coloring, low chromatic aberration, fantastic lens, right? Only problem for me is, it's an APS-C lens. I've got a full frame camera. If I was to stick that lens on this camera, I wouldn't be able to shoot it at 18 millimeters without the entire outside edge of the frame being black. Just a giant circle around the image. Now, I've heard that if you zoom into something more like 28 mil, it goes away and you can actually shoot that same lens at 35 without really much of an issue on a full frame camera. But that's still not getting the full use out of the lens. Like, if you want an 18-35, you're not actually getting that. You're getting maybe half of the focal range. But keep in mind that your sensor size also kind of affects the lenses that you can adapt from other cameras to yours. So for example, if I had a Micro Four Thirds, I'd be able to put a speed booster on and put even larger full frame lenses onto a smaller sensor and get a totally different result that way, where I could actually get more of a full frame look on a smaller sensor. So yeah, the sensor size actually does play a big choice when it comes to which type of camera and which brand to go with. Now, when it comes to autofocus, the thing that you're actually giving up is basically control. You're telling the camera, hey, you take over, you got this, just focus on this particular person or thing and stick on that. And it's not that you're giving up complete control, because most cameras like this give you the ability to touch on what you want to focus on, but you're trusting the camera to do that for you rather than saying, no, you don't do anything other than what I tell you. There's plenty of times at a wedding where I turn the autofocus off completely because I know for a fact I want the focus to stay at a certain distance, and I just move the camera. Say when you're going around a flower bouquet. Yeah, the camera can stick onto whatever flower you want to point it at, but it makes it so much more dynamic of a shot for you to just set a focus distance and move yourself around rather than one flower being in focus no matter where the camera's at. That's the kind of feature that, because you can choose when to use it and when not to use it, I think is kind of a no-brainer that I would like to have it, and then just be able to tell the camera, no, I got it right now. I'd love to just have it in every camera, have great autofocus that you could trust to do exactly what you think it should be doing. Now, as much as I hyped up the whole flip screen thing, the one thing that does sacrifice is the durability of the camera. I just watched a YouTube video a couple days ago where someone was saying, oh yeah, this is one I keep around for shooting with an external monitor because I knocked the screen straight off the camera. The camera still functions, but the screen is completely gone. So yeah, you do give up some durability when it comes to having an articulating screen. For me, it's pretty safe. I don't usually throw my cameras around. I haven't really dropped my camera. My wife dropped it the first wedding she used it at. Thanks, hun. But it turned out just fine. And the screen was flipped closed completely anyway. So that's another thing when it comes to a flip screen. Something to keep in mind is you could just flip it to the open position and just leave it that way all the time and never actually flip the screen out if you don't need to shoot that way. And at that point, that flip screen basically is stuck to the camera. It's pretty durable. It's gonna take a lot to break it. Just about as much to break that as it would be a 5D Mark IV screen that's stuck on there permanently, or the A7S II. How many times have you seen a broken screen on the back of those? It's just about the same as if you took a flip screen and stuck it to the back. As long as you're not flipping it out, the durability thing's not really an issue. But again, just like the autofocus, I'd rather have the option and choose when to use it and when not to use it than to not have it as a choice at all. And because I've always heard the good stories rhyme, I'm looking at the frames per second and saying, well, that's the same kind of cost as shooting 4K actually has. The features are great. Shooting high frames like 120 frames or shooting 20 frames per second in photos, those are great features to have, but wow, do you start going through memory cards fast. Like, we used to fill up 128 gig cards with just photos at a wedding. That's a massive amount of photos that we would blast through. Thousands and thousands in one day. I can't even imagine if we were shooting anything faster than 10 frames a second. We were almost doubling what we were actually getting out of a day. The number of cards you'd have to have is crazy, and you have to manage that storage of all of those things and say, when did I shoot this? What pictures are on this one? Did you dump these ones onto the computer? Did you dump these ones on the computer? That whole process of managing that many cards just makes everything that much more risky that you might accidentally lose something. So getting a higher frames per second definitely costs you both the storage cost and the peace of mind, the stress to deal with managing all those extra files. So yeah, we're kind of reflecting back on the storage space of the 4K video being extra file size too, and just saying this is one of the costs for a feature like that. To give you better quality pictures, to give you more options when it comes to pictures, to give you more options when it comes to slow motion capabilities in video, it does cost you storage space, and it's something that you have to judge for yourself, whether you can handle that extra stress and whether you can afford the extra cards and hard drives to process all of those photos. So here's the breakdown for me. The features on the list that are most important to me are actually already checked off by the 6D Mark II. It has over 20 megapixels for photos. The raw photos are fantastic. I've never been upset with the pictures that come out of the 6D Mark II. They've always been great. I got a full frame sensor, good autofocus. There's a flip screen on there. A reasonable amount of frames per second for both photos and videos. Now there are definite upgrades like 4K video or log that I just don't have, but I'm not really losing clients for not having those features in this camera. And the cost of not only having to upgrade the camera, but also upgrade the computer and the hard drives and the memory cards would probably snowball faster than I expect into something that I just don't think I could handle right now. When I was thinking about making this video, I knew that I was kind of onto something when I saw Shane from Geeky Nerdy Techie on YouTube talk about his A7C. He had just recently picked one up, was looking at the features going, it doesn't have this or that, or there's a couple things that it's missing from the A7 III, the A7C didn't have. And he was like, I don't know if that's gonna be a deal breaker for me, but I'm gonna get it, I'll try it out, and I'll see. And yeah, as soon as he got it, tried using it, he definitely noticed that it was missing some stuff. But then Shane talked about towards the end of this video I was watching, how he was amazed at the functionality of the A7C, how easy it was for him to get the video that he wanted out of it. He just sets it up, pretty easy to get your settings set initially, point the thing at yourself, and it just does exactly what you want it to do. A7C is kind of a comparison to the 6D Mark II, and it's something that when it came out, everyone was like, oh, yeah, but it's missing all this extra stuff. I mean, yeah, it looks like a decent camera, but why would I buy that when just for a little bit more, $200 more for the A7 III, why would you get the A7C? But when it comes to the functionality of it, the fact that they simplified the body and it's lighter weight makes it easier to use overall. It might turn out that the ease of use, the higher level of functionality, might be the thing that you're looking for if you're not desperate for the features that you lose in that particular situation. That's kind of the idea of this whole video. The features versus the function, which ones can you sacrifice to get the higher functionality? And for myself, is it worth it for me to keep the 6D Mark II and to give up on all the extra feature set that I could have for the functionality that I know and have gotten used to over the last 3 years using this camera? Am I overthinking the whole thing and I should just jump to something like maybe the A7C next, just to get some of those extra features that I don't have right now? And maybe when I get that camera in my hands and I start using it, I'm gonna be like, oh, I was so stupid for thinking the 6D Mark II was good. How dare I? And I'm really interested to find out how you feel your camera fits in that balance of features and functionality. Do you go straight feature heavy and say, well, I'll figure out how to use it? Or do you go for something that's like, may not have all the bells and whistles, but it's so easy to use, you just love the results you get out of it, and that's good enough for you? Definitely let me know, either in the comments down below here, or you can always hit me up on Twitter, @PhillyNichols. And don't worry, Tayo, I see you. The next video is for you.